No? Yes. Okay. So, thank you very much for coming to the last panel in the series When Robots Rule the World. Um, Today, we have a panel of all the presenters that you could have seen throughout the year. But if you did not have a chance to see all of us present, and you are dying to see us in action, if you go to the website for this series, which is 2022-2023 Community Engagement Series, all our talks are recorded. It says live stream, but actually you can find them on YouTube, so you can watch them if you're interested. But let me introduce myself, and then everybody will introduce themselves as well. So my name is Vera Klekovkina. I teach French and global cinema at UWSP, and I'm just really excited that this series actually took place this year.
Hello, I'm Patrick Conley. I'm a professor in the psychology department. My personal interests are in perception and language, so you can see kind of a natural overlap between what we're going to talk here tonight and my own personal interests. My talk earlier was on perception in human and robots, talking about how robots might be able to perceive the real world and how what we could learn from them and what they could learn from us. And so my interests naturally lie with things like natural language processing, information processing, and sensory processing that we're going to be discussing tonight.
Good evening. Hello. My name is Joshua Horn. I'm in the philosophy department. Philosophers are genuinely confused about a lot of things, so I'm not really centrally focused on one issue. A few years ago, I gave a talk at the library on what it means for a machine or an artificial intelligence to be able to understand or know something. This year, my focus was more on our ethical and legal obligations to machines, and so I'm interested in the metaphysical puzzles related to AI, and the mind issue, the philosophy of mind issues related to things like consciousness and how we should understand that, and then the way that we should treat these entities, our ethical and legal obligations to them.
Hello, there we go. My name is Tomi Heimonen. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Computing and New Media Technologies. I guess I'm the computer person in this panel. Surprisingly enough, I haven't really done any research in AI, but I'm really interested in the sort of ethical and social aspects of using AI, and my research is mostly in human-centered design, so that's sort of the direction that I approach AI from. Like, how do we design AI in such a way that it actually helps people instead of harming them?
That's a good segue for me, because I'm the doomsayer. My name is Cary Elza. I teach media studies, and that means that I come at this this whole thing from the perspective of science fiction. My talk was on the history of robots and AI in film, and as you can imagine, even if you didn't see that talk, that's a lot of apocalypses. My concern is, of course, about humans' relationship to AI, but also the notion of hubris. And I'm interested in talking about ways in which we can use AI responsibly to avoid apocalyptic scenarios.
Hello, I'm James Barry. I am an associate professor of English. My specialty is linguistics. I'm not completely sure I belong on this panel, but I am here anyway. My area of research is historical English linguistics, so that doesn't have a whole lot to do with artificial intelligence. However, I am coming at this topic from a sociolinguistic perspective, looking at bias and the kinds of language-based biases that we all sort of carry already, and how they then get translated into programs that we create. I think we like to think that our programs are free from linguistic and other kinds of biases, but the reality is actually quite different, that there are biases that creep in all the time. And it's important for us to be aware of this, and also then to be able to make AI and other similar kinds of technologies accessible to people from all sort of speaker groups, all sorts of marginalized populations, you know, basically languages that may not be super profitable to have AI features in. But if we look at artificial intelligence as a public good rather than as a public for-profit kind of enterprise, we might be able to change some of that around.
Thank you, everybody, for agreeing to be on the panel, presenting, and supplying us with really interesting ideas to think about this subject, because it's such a rich subject, and it affects every single part of our lives. And of course, for me, it was from Google Translate. As a French professor, studying already from 2016, I knew when my students used Google Translate, because it's like, you could not write like this. This is very complex, subordinate sentences in French with perfect syntax, right? So it was kind of first introduction to how machines can change our lives. And then, of course, having students discuss global cinema, French cinema, European cinema in my classes and talking about robots, they were so excited. And I thought, we need to talk more about this. So when we all came together, and you also come together through either class discussions, because many of my students are here and I'm really happy to see you, but also community members, because I think this is something we really need to talk about and think about it. So if you want to learn more and read more about this subject, our library has prepared a special guide for us. So you can get to many digital materials, films, or books. Some of them are actually e-books, all on topics of AI. So please look for this. However, today I have, or we have identified several discussion questions. And this is, we're looking for somewhat informal format of this panel. So each one of us will talk about what we see future will be, like doom or gloom, or like, yay, AI, when am I buying my next robot, right? And then we would love to invite you to ask questions. So as we're talking, please think about it. But if you have questions, follow up, please do not hesitate, okay? Sounds good? Okay, thank you. So let's start with the first question. How do you see the future? Do you see like, oh my God, we should be worried right now, there will be no humans left, will be only machines? Or yes, this is a solution, we will solve all Earth problems with AI?
Well, I think for me, it'll be, can you hear me, transformative in a way that we haven't seen since perhaps the Industrial Revolution. And I think we are at the precipice of a massive change in our lives. The things I've seen just doing casual research in this, in terms of the language processing, in terms of, you know, things like self-driving cars and so forth, has potential to change our society from you know, top to bottom. I'm concerned in ways about the nature of reality itself. I mean, can we tell the difference between manipulated images, manipulated video, and so forth, and the real thing? And so I think in an era of accusations of fake news and so forth, imagine a world where you can create a perfect replica of anyone saying anything, doing anything, and it looks completely real. We're not that far off. We are maybe 10 years away from doing that. Now it's still clumsy, but in 10 years, it might be indistinguishable from the real thing. Are we ready for that world? What if the gatekeeping of AI is only other people that control AIs that look at these fake videos and say, hey, I can tell the difference between this and reality, but will the ordinary person have access to that technology and so forth? So that's the part that worries me. The parts that excite me are the parts where you bring this technology to everyone. In the past, things like computers have been kind of cordoned off from the ordinary person. You have to learn arcane symbols and and learn how to program and so forth. What about natural language processing that allows an ordinary person to create a application or program that works, without knowing programming language, without knowing these things, that bring these tools to the ordinary person. So I'm excited about the potential, but I'm concerned about the other potential for upheaval and confusion and lack of cohesion about what's real and what's not real, and that sort of disruption that we've already started to see, frankly, in our society. So those are my biggest concerns.
Can I just give an example of this happening recently? Did anyone see the image of like the Pope in the puffy jacket? So that originated on one of my Facebook AI groups. And like there was a whole phase that the group went through for like 3 days where they were just posting pictures of the Pope. I got no explanation for that. I honestly don't. But that picture, it made it out of the AI groups, and then it was circulated, and people thought it was real. Now what's happening is nearly every day in these AI Facebook groups, it's become a joke. Like, it's funny that images that are generated by AI are being accepted as real by other people. So, like, it's already here. This is already an issue. And video generators are not very sophisticated as yet, but it's going to happen really, really quickly. Deep fake technology is already really good. And so the proliferation of misinformation and misinformation that can be weaponized, it's sooner than we think. Again, I'm the doomsayer. I'm going to take a step back and let somebody else talk.
Have you seen the beer ad that's been making rounds as well?
Which one?
I think there was one for Budweiser, I think, or it was meant to be. And it was kind of freaky because it worked like 90%, but then there were these strange artifacts that make it like super unnatural. Yeah. So there are definitely some rough edges. And kind of going back to Patrick's point, I'm concerned not about the technology itself. I'm concerned about people, because the technology itself we're very far away from general purpose AI, which is an AI that can think like humans do. What we have right now is what is called narrow AI, which is basically very task-specific AI that does what we tell it to do. And I'm concerned about what are the things that we are asking AI to do. What are the problems that we're applying AI to, that we're doing it without really understanding the ramifications of what's going to happen. So for example, a lot of companies are using AI to screen applicants for jobs. But those AIs are basically black boxes. Like the people that are using them don't understand how the AI makes the decisions that it does. And to me, that's kind of problematic if you're trying to say that we're hiring the best person for this job, but you have no idea of explaining how the AI actually does that decision. So, but on the other hand, I think if we can get a grip on how we use AI, if we can do it responsibly, then yes, there's a lot of promise with that.
I just want to echo. Maybe. Echo. Yeah, there we go. I just want to echo the comments that have just been made. My concern, I think you and I agree. I think we said this on the podcast that we were on earlier, on Shawnee Luff's podcast that we did earlier this year about is technology necessarily bad, or is it, in what way is it dangerous? And I think that technology is sort of neutral. It's sort of how we apply it. My concern is I'm okay with outsourcing some things to technology, but I don't think that we're going to be reflective enough about what we're outsourcing to artificial intelligence. And I give you a couple of examples that worry me that are pretty current. So right now, the Writers Guild is under lockdown, and they're on strike And one of the concerns of the Writers Guild is that studios are starting to use artificial intelligence generators to write scripts, and they're worried about that. And so that worries me, that we have this artistic expression that makes us distinctly human, and we're willing to say, for the purposes of efficiency and expediency and profit, we just need to do it as quick as possible. And so I think that's something to be mindful of. And so that's in terms of writing. The other thing is, several months ago, I think it was several months ago, there was an art contest. Do you remember this? And somebody entered the art contest, but they didn't create the piece of art themselves. They wrote computer software that created the art for them, and it won. And it was really controversial, because the question was, well, are we saying that the thing to be judged is the art, as if the piece of art was objective, or was the winner the person that created it? And so I think there's some ways where the technology can be used for good, and it might be promising, and it might make our lives easier in important ways, but I worry about outsourcing the things that make us distinctly human, and making the things that make our lives, enriched and powerful and meaningful, that gets outsourced for the purposes of profit or efficiency.
How do we use AI in a responsible way? I think this is a pretty good question, and part of the concern that I have is the fact that AI does not, at this point, isn't self-generated. It is generated by humans. Humans create AI, which means that when humans write these programs and filter for certain things, they are filtering based on the way that they see the world. And the problem is that not everyone sees the world as you do. I am sure all of you see the world in a completely open, balanced, loving way, right? You have no problems with anyone. You love everyone equally. You are willing to just sort of welcome everyone and everything. And you know all 6,800 languages across the world, right? So you're able to use those. Congratulations, you, for that. So you're able to use those and insert all of those into the AI programming that you use, right? All of those languages. No? Perhaps not. So the problem comes then, how do we draw lines? How do we make boundaries? Who gets access to AI? Who doesn't get access to AI? There may be plenty of apocalypses coming, but shouldn't everyone be able to enjoy those apocalypses in the same way? This is the way I am approaching this. So I believe that we should all be able to approach the end with the same sort of understanding and the same sort of smile on our face. I think it's really important, the fact that at this point, AI has been developed for profitable populations. It has been developed for use in situations, maybe there are situations that are positive to like, I know we had a presenter on the health and well-being of people and how AI can actually be quite helpful with this. And there are certainly positive things that AI can bring to any sort of technological advance can bring. But the problem with AI is that the interface of AI is linguistic, which means that instead of learning arcana, as Tomi apparently has, congratulations on that. That was pretty exciting to hear. I'm looking forward to your magic and witchcraft hours. I'm sure it is. But instead of learning this sort of numeric-based binary coding setup and syntaxes that might be accessible to anyone who can recognize numbers, this is language-based. But not all languages are treated equally, and not all speaker groups are treated equally, and not everyone gets to participate. And this is a more immediate problem that I see, is the fact that the languages that are prioritized tend to be, and this will shock you, I'm sure, the European colonial languages that have dominated the world for the past 500 years. I'm looking at the shocked faces. Yes, so those European colonial languages, plus Mandarin, as Mandarin is coming along with its own colonial plans quite well, are pretty much what we see. There are a few other languages that are included, but essentially it's a highly limited set of languages. And these languages and their speaker groups get prioritized, and a lot of people, in fact, probably the majority of people across the world, are left out as a result. So accessibility becomes a huge sort of stumbling block, and part of this, I believe, arises from the fact that most AI technology comes from a profit-making perspective. And people who speak English, people who speak Mandarin, people who speak Spanish, will include the French, even though I have personal issues with them. But people who speak these languages are prioritized over others. And this is part of what the problem is that exists right now. The other problems coming down the road of higher level, apocalyptic scenarios. Again, don't we want everyone to understand the apocalypse in the same way? This is my question. Sure, but we have set up that infantilizing system. It's a long-term system. This is nothing new. That sort of patriarchal, pat people on the head and tell them they're good, and maybe they'll get a lollipop if they behave. So this is not terribly new, basically. I do think that there are plenty of people around the world who are capable of taking technology and making use of it. And we see that regularly. The problem is if they have to do it in one of the colonial languages, and then they have to somehow convert that into something for their own population, without much support at universities that generally teach in the colonial languages, so education tends to be a colonial sort of enterprise as well. All of this tends to have sort of an existing infrastructure that is very difficult to overcome. So I think the problem is not just that there are not smart people all over the world, because we know that there are. The problem is that the system at this point is set up to be uneven at its onset. I'm probably not answering your question based on the look on your face.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
But I want to add another layer to that, because language is also connected to culture, of course, and cultural values, right? And so the idea is then which values do we prioritize? And that's what worries me with AI, is that it's not only we limit accessibility to people who do not speak those languages, but we are imposing value systems that come from a very individualistic society. So the way I come to this discussion, for me, it's very important to talk about care and a society where we don't know who is going to be reimbursed for care, right? Who is going to be caring for whom? So if we're going to have this fantasy of having AI unburden us, but then the question is going to unburden who? Which cultures, which languages, which economic status, right? Like only wealthy people will be unburdened, and then the ones who happen to be, poor and speak a different language, will they then be completely replaced by machines that could be programmed?
Another problem we have right now is that AI is very resource intensive. my background is in training semantic models, very primitive forebears of things like ChatGPT. And we would train our corpora up on 1 billion words, which we were very impressed at. This is back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now we have corpora in ChatGPT, even its simplistic models are built up on trillions of words. And these simply cannot be replicated by anything other than big corporations, massive, governmental or corporate level powerhouses, because they are just very resource intensive. Now that might change in the future, but I still see AI as going to be, especially something in the near term, as something that's very much going to be amongst the haves and have-nots. It's going to be something, a tool that the wealthy tend to have and the not wealthy of wherever will tend not to have. Now, given that I think AI has the potential for negative consequences, as we said, like the question of reality and so forth, that's not going to be perhaps a universal good that some societies have access to it and others don't. But I think for the foreseeable future, that's just going to be kind of a fact of life. It's just, there's too complicated and technological to do these things with anything other than a huge budget. At some point in the future, that may change, right? It may be possible. Now, there's interesting things like, I'm going to go do a pop culture reference here. How many of you seen The Mandalorian? Right? So I don't want to spoil anything, but at the end of season 2, this is last season, so you don't have to be up on the new season. They had a very famous character return. And this character was de-aged and so forth. It was like earlier, so the real actor who plays this character is older now, but they had de-aged, they put an author, and then they basically pasted the younger person's face on it. And it looked pretty okay, but not very convincing, right? And so people went to Lucasfilm and they said, there's a guy on the internet, on YouTube, who does better deep fakes than you do. Right? And you could just go find this guy's work on YouTube. It's like he did a better job. Like he fixed the stuff. He took the character from that episode and fixed it, and it looked better. And this is just a guy working at that point in his own house with his own technology, computer he bought and so forth, and it looked better than what Lucasfilm was putting out, right? So they hired him, right? So, I mean, it's not... the potential is there for the democratization of this technology, but I think we have to be aware that at this initial stage, those that have access to these these powerhouse computers and all these corpora and all this resources and so forth are naturally going to have an advantage over people that don't. Right? And perhaps in the future that will change as the technology becomes more accessible, more widespread.
Do you think if it was more democratized, that would be an improvement? Because I'm thinking here of the way that the internet was the same way, right? I mean, it and computers and like this is.
I know where you're going.
Yeah.
And it's like it has had its upside and it's had its downside.
Yeah.
There's definitely aspects to it. So all I can say is it's going to be transformative. Whether it's good or bad, I can't foresee that at this point. I just know at this point there's certain things that only big companies or big governments can do. That may change over time.
I think there's also the question of like who is developing this technology. Like it's easy to say that it's a big corporation, it's Microsoft, it's OpenAI, but you also have to look at the people that are working there. And unfortunately, I might lose my Tech Pro Club membership over this, but like it's young white guys for the most part, and you were talking about bias. Like, what's a better way to introduce bias into AI than having people that have, in some ways, a very insulated experience of life and the world, building these models and training these models with data that are then, in many cases, misapplied to other groups of people. And then we're all like, well, I didn't see that coming. Like, how could that happen? When if you ask somebody that actually has some experience with how technology has been misapplied, it's like, well, duh.
And at a breakneck pace, too, with no guardrails. So I don't know who saw the New York Times article, like really recently, like yesterday, the guy from Google who is like one of the fathers of AI, and he's quit, and he thinks he's like Oppenheimer. And you know, like one of his arguments is that there aren't enough guardrails yet, and that there's such a competition to churn these things out for profit motives. And if this company doesn't do it, then this company is going to do it first, and that company can't do it first. And so things are progressing too quickly, and issues of bias, lots of problems might generate just from the fact that things are being done recklessly and quickly without concern for the future. So, like, again, this is me being negative, and the other issue that I wanted to mention too is ChatGPT scrapes the internet, right? What is on the internet?
Only happy, nice things.
Just happy, nice things.
Well, you remember what happened with Microsoft's chatbot in
Yes.
2016, right? So
Oh my God.
they had Microsoft developed a chatbot that they put up on Twitter, and in 24 hours they had to pull it because it was learning from like what it was designed to do. It was learning from, you know, everybody's tweets, and it started spouting Nazi, white supremacist language, and so they had to pull it. Yeah.
On Twitter?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and media.
Can you imagine?
And algorithms favor extremism, right? And this has been true forever. Like, this is true, like the dawn of the newspapers, you know, like extremist headlines, sensationalism sells. And algorithms will favor the things that get the most reacts of any kind, negative and positive. And so these are the things that rise. So these are the things that, when we're scraping the internet to see what we can find, the stuff that we're gonna find is stuff that reinforces bias about gender and race. It's maybe the worst parts of us, or the parts that, you know, these programs are learning from. And so that worries me as well. I do have like positive things to say about AI. I want to assure you. Has anybody seen the movie Her? 1, 2, 3 happy people. Okay. So this is a movie. It's Spike Jonze. It's from like 2010, something like that. And it imagines a world where operating systems, you know, AI is part of our lives on a daily basis. And they do the menial tasks for us that we don't want to do, like organize our email, like keep our schedules. And they also act as companions, and issues of care arise with this, for sure. But what they don't do in that movie is be creative. I mean, nope, that's not true. They are creative, but the movie also strongly implies that they're not taking jobs away from anybody. So this AI, the main character works at a company where he writes like creatively written letters, and that's his job. So AI is not doing that. And so this is a world in which AI has been integrated into society in like a kind of an emotionally supportive way. So it's not like this is whenever I start to get upset about this, I remember that like Joaquin Phoenix was doing kind of okay in Her, kind of.
Yeah, but not to spoil the movie.
Dumped by the AI.
Exactly, not to spoil the movie. When I showed that to my students, they said, "Okay, now we have a fear of rejection by AI. Thank you very much." But for me, the question. What do we do? How do we stop it?
So it seems to me that at some point we're going to need, we've been kind of skirting around the issue, kind of an ethical set of laws. And that could be both legal sort of laws about what can and can't be done with AI, and it could also be kind of ethical principles, like, you know, everything from like Asimov's law of robotics to, you know, to just kind of general ethical principles that we actively build in. We don't let it just train up, or we don't let it go by accident, but we try to actually incorporate into our artificial intelligence systems. And so, I mean, especially concerned, you know, like we were saying before about the principle of general AI, we're still a long way away from a general AI, a truly intelligent system that approximates or even surpasses human intelligence. But when that does happen, whether it's 50 years or 100 years from now or so forth, how will we hold those entities to account, right? I was talking about this in my own talk. It's like, okay, when one of the Tesla's cars crashes into something and it's clearly an error on the part of this kind of driving system, who is punished? If you and I crash, we're going to have a punishment of some sort, especially if it was clearly our error. And even if it's just like a fine or so forth, or we might go to jail, what's the AI equivalent of that? How do we reward good behavior and punish bad behavior in a system that is, at this point, at these points, of course, clearly not alive? Who is held accountable for problems with AI? And so in the short term, I think that, of course, is their human creators. But it's a kind of ethical sort of spectrum that we have to think about. And I think it's going to become clear to us with all the mischief that people are going to get up to in the next several years with AI. We were talking about creating art and so forth. Well, for instance, these art programs work by scouring the internet, as you said. And what happens when their art is too close to a real artist? Or are they going to be punished for plagiarism? Are they going to be...
There's already lawsuits.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's going to be a system where, like I said, there's going to be chaos in the short term until we figure out exactly how we're going to deal with the implications of all these issues. And I think that we're going to have to work towards a series of ethical rules for this, both for the creators and for the AIs themselves.
And just to turn the question a little bit, so I think the ethical and legal questions that we've been talking about so far have been, what kind of rules and ethical and legal principles could we put in place to protect us, right? But I also wonder if these things become indistinguishable from humans, and you can't decide whether they're conscious or whether they have feelings or they're sentient, or what kind of protections do they deserve? If an artificial intelligence writes a script for a show, does it have intellectual property rights to it? If you have a conscious machine inside your house and you're telling it to feed your dog and take care of your kids and yada yada yada, is that something approximating slavery in some sense? Like if it's something that can feel and has thoughts and beliefs and desires of its own. So I think it's just as important to thinking about how we should develop ethical and legal principles to protect us. I also think there's going to be a certain point where we're also going to have to bring them into the equation and be inclusive toward these entities too. What rights and obligations do they have? That's also something that should be on the table.
And I mean, it seems absurd to talk about now when these tools really are so primitive, but that's kind of my thesis for this, is that it's coming a lot faster than you think it is. I think that within everyone in this room's lifetime, you'll start to see these issues become relevant. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about this. It would have been science fiction. But now I think it is something that's going to happen much faster than any of us possibly believe at this point and realistically are prepared for at this point, given how slow we are to update laws and expectations and policies and so forth.
I mean, your options are, there is something in principle such that these machines, these artificial intelligence programs, will never approximate humans. They just will never be conscious. They will never be able to think. They will never have feelings. They will never. So if you think that there's something in principle that they never will be able to do, then maybe you don't have to broach some of these topics. Mm-hmm. But if the question is, well, they will be able to do them eventually, it's going to be 10 years or 50 years or 100 years, or we're just disagreeing about the time, then we're still going to have to answer those questions. It's just whether they're more pressing or less pressing. Turing in the early 1950s was thinking machines won't be able to take crack jokes and enjoy strawberries and cream and fall in love, and look how far we've come in 70 years. Where are we going to be in another 70?
So maybe this is a good moment to ask our audience if you have questions, so if you have comments, or if you have concerns, or...
So I was actually really interested in the sort of discussion about the democratization And I think I'm certainly not advocating for an unregulated state, and I think these are really significant problems that have to be grappled with. I think where it becomes difficult is how do you find the balance and do it in a way that doesn't actually stifle innovation. And I think, like, historically we can look at advancements and they have happened because the sort of infrastructure has been in the hands of the haves, as you've described them, and they financed it, but then it was opened up. And I mean, even on a smaller scale, when you think about things like pharmaceutical drugs, right? Like, they ultimately become a generic, and it's opened up that way. So I think the concerns are absolutely warranted, but I do think that there's a risk that if we focus too much on how are we going to solve it all at once, we potentially end up without advancement.
It's a good point. I mean, absolutely. I mean, and it clearly parallels, I mean, something that's directly relevant to your question, like the prevalence of computers in our society. There was a time not so long ago, within my lifetime, I know, where computers were only for big companies, universities, and so forth. No one had a computer in their home and so forth. And so now, of course, we've seen how society has, I mean, how much society has changed on the principle that everyone has access to this technology. We carry around computers far more powerful than the most powerful governments had just a few decades ago. So it's not unprecedented, right? The question will be, as always, is how does the technology develop? In some ways, it'll be like, if it is something that is accessible, that you don't need, tons of money to process or tons of computer power to process and so forth, then naturally it will flow to more people. If it remains something that takes enormous amounts of resources in order to do well, or to do it in a way that is superior to what other people can do, then there's going to continue to be inequality, in my opinion. But it'll just depend. It also depends on what kind of tasks you want to do with it, right? If you want to do something really powerful, like do a simulation of a moon landing or so forth, then that's going to continue to take enormous amounts of power. But if, on the other hand, you want the kind of power to be able to generate language or translate or so forth, I think that would be accessible to many people, and virtually everyone around the world, in a relatively short amount of time. I think there'll be the ability to to do smaller kind of computer tasks like that relatively quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I personally take a lot of inspiration from the general incompetence of large corporations and governments, and on the other side, the ingenuity and sort of the activism of open source communities and other groups of people that are willing to put some skin in the game to fix some of these issues. I think there are already people that are developing sort of anti-AI technology, and they're doing that on a shoestring budget. Like, there was this one guy who was an undergrad in Cornell, I think, who developed a detection mechanism for ChatGPT, and he did it over the winter break without access to any supercomputers or anything like that. So I'm sort of hopeful that we have enough people in sort of the grassroots level that are willing to kind of be the force that balances out some of the misbehaviors that we're seeing.
There's also the Glaze program that you can upload your art using this special program, and it makes it basically invisible to the scraping of AI art generators. And so there are for sure people who are innovating and will continue to push back against innovation and progress that happens too fast without concern. And I mean, in the history of media, there's a lot of examples of technology that was given openly and then technology that's closed. I mean, you look at photography was given free to the world. No one made any money off the invention of photography because the inventors thought strongly, philosophically, that it belonged to the world. And then you look at the telegraph and the telephone, and these are networks that developed as monopolies. And it matters what we do now. So it matters what we do now in terms of regulation. It will have a huge impact on how it develops and who has access to it.
Recently, I've been getting a lot of emails from my professors who are kind of explaining how they're very frustrated with the use of ChatGPT when it comes to like writing essays or answering test questions. I was wondering if you guys have any perspectives on how AI could affect the integrity of academia as a whole.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say that it's always not okay to cheat. So, like, it's the same as you cannot cut and paste from Wikipedia, and to now Turnitin has an AI detector. So it's the same.
But I'm saying, like, in the future when AI becomes more developed, when it's almost impossible to tell the difference between a handwritten essay versus one created by AI, like, that can definitely start playing more of a dangerous role.
We may have to adapt. It's, we'll just have to create a system. So, for instance, I was just talking about this with my friend, and he was saying he used it to kind of create because he's a Presbyterian minister, create kind of a template for a sermon or something like that. And I said, but then you're there to look over it and tell what's the good part, what's the bad part, what needs to be filled in, and you have the expertise to tell when something is like, oh, that's a little too close to this. This is verging on plagiarism here and so forth, and correct the stuff where it is superficial or just plain incorrect. So there'll always be that aspect. If it becomes truly indistinguishable from expert level discourse, then we're going to have to adapt. We may have to go back to systems where we do most of our testing in person. We may have to go to systems where we have more oral or those sorts of presentations, versus take-home finals or take-home papers or so forth. But it's a great question. It's something we're going to have to monitor, and it may become something of an arms race. It may become something where the anti-chat GPTs are taking and trying to keep ahead of the people who are doing the next generation of that, and it becomes this system where one temporarily has the advantage over the other. Again, it's never appropriate to cheat, but if this really becomes a problem, then it's going to be us that have to make our changes. We're going to have to move to protect the integrity of our system, even if it's less convenient. It's obviously not convenient to bring all your students in and give them an oral examination, but we may have to adapt along those lines into something that continues to maintain the integrity of our institution.
The other thing in this conversation, though, is like I don't like assuming that all students want to cheat. Because you're here to learn. Students are here to learn. They're here to grapple with new ideas. They're here to think in new and exciting ways and to stretch themselves. And I don't like this basic assumption that ChatGPT means that all students are going to cheat now. I don't think that that's the case. And if it is, if this just means that it's just way too easy to write an essay, and so we just don't get to write essays on computers anymore, that makes me profoundly sad. It makes me so sad that I can't trust the creative work that a student does, that it's actually coming from them. Because that means that we're outsourcing our thinking. Like, why? Why do you want to do that? Don't do that.
That is my biggest concern. It's the question not about cheating, but it's question about outsourcing and endangering our responsibilities and also our pleasures, because I think learning is a pleasure, but it's a much slower pleasure than putting a prompt in ChatGPT and getting the information within 1 minute. The idea is when you look for information yourself, when you actually analyze it, you synthesize it, there is a sense of self-empowerment. There is a sense like, yes, now I own this information. And when you can no longer produce this because the machine produced it for you, then you don't have anything, right? You don't have the increased understanding. The same thing as outsourcing of care. Like, for example, yes, I may have a robot that will clean my floor, right? But then what if it breaks down and I never learned how to do it? The same thing with cooking. And then what am I going to do? Am I going to starve? So are we going to have like some kind of like boot camp for life skills that now you have to learn because the machines are no longer here, or so I think it's a great question, but it's a much larger question.
They made movies about this too, both WALL-E and Idiocracy.
Yeah. I think we also have to, as educators, we have to critically look at like what are we asking students to do and how are we teaching them to do that. So I teach programming, and there's lots of programming tasks that are reasonably unpleasant and mundane. Like there's lots of boilerplate that you have to write to get your programs to work. And I can definitely see AI doing that because there's really not a whole lot of problem solving that goes into that activity. So kind of, I guess what I'm saying is that we can sort of elevate, hopefully, what the students are learning from like not spending time on the mundane stuff and spending time on the actual problem solving. It's like, okay, the AI is going to take care of the fact that this program is going to run. Now it's my job to make sure that it's doing the right thing. But yeah, you can still, if the instructor is asking you to write a simple program, yeah, sure, you can ask ChatGPT to do that, and it'll do it.
The boot camp thing that you said for life skills, like, don't we already have that to some extent? Like, when the washing machine was invented, like, everybody was using it, and like, you can kind of like know intuitively how to wash clothes, but there are other things like, there are adults in the United States right now that don't know how to work an oven, because they just go to the restaurant for every single meal. So I feel like that's not so out of the question, like a life skill boot camp. And will it just be like wilderness survival? Like, this is what we had to do back in pioneer days. Or will it be like a life skill class that's required in high schools, like cooking or like money management and type of stuff?
I mean, I think it's hard to give a universal answer to that because people are going to have different strategies for what they're willing to outsource and what they're not willing to outsource. And I think the answer there is sort of the same with the students. Some of them are going to want to write and wrestle with ideas, and some are willing to outsource that. And I feel a profound sadness for the same reason that Cary does. But it's going to take a collective conversation about what we're willing to give up and what we're willing to fight for and keep that preserves our humanity. I also think I don't want to say we here. When I assign writing, I need to do a better job, I think, of communicating why the writing is an important skill, and that it's important for thinking and understanding and clarifying your thoughts. I think there's this misunderstanding that I've got all of my stuff worked out and then I have to put it on paper. And it's as if that's the product. And it's like, no, sometimes just the writing is what helps you clarify your own position and what you think. Sometimes the art of painting is, maybe it always is the case, is even more important than the end product, or the act of writing the script is more important than what makes it to the. And so we need to be more clear about why the act of expression is the thing that matters, and that's not what you want to outsource to some machine that has no clue what it's doing. It just produces the product.
Submitting and writing a good essay, submitting it, or for vibrant civil discourse, what's essential is critical thinking, which is always human, creative, personal, unique, and yet has the laws of logic and argumentation. And civil discourse doesn't always have that aspect of critical thinking. In election season, I listen to political rhetoric that is addressing my fears and anxieties, but not much critical thinking. In the new Sherlock Holmes TV series, Sherlock would be solving a problem, and then you would see a visual of all the data that's clicking through his brain of how he's going to analyze the situation and come up with And I'm wondering if AI could be an instrument to collate critical responses to all kinds of rhetoric that we would be able to read in real time, like a ribbon underneath the political speech, kind of an instant fact check, or points of view of various sundry positions, but who's saying what who's paying for this commercial, who's what does this serve the common good or not? In an ideal world, I think civil discourse would iron out our biases, and it would push us closer to a common good versus special interests. But that's not the reality I feel simply as a voter. And where do I participate in civil discourse on an off season? And so, civil discourse, how do we involve citizenry in collective critical thinking? Because none of us come up with an answer that's going to work. We have to pool all of our thinking together, and our feeling too. There's an affective aspect to it too. But I think AI could, we have fact check, but then there's another step, and it's not always in real time. But I think AI could help facilitate, keep asking the critical questions and challenge, analyze the rhetoric, and saying, is this up to muster or not?
Yeah, maybe. I think, there are rules in logic and there are rules for argumentation, and you might be able to program a machine to be able to know whether the arguments, there are programs that will do that now and have been able to do that for a while. But it's really tough to be able to evaluate an argument, and I don't know that it's something that you could just outsource in a mathematical term. It takes to evaluate whether something is true or if it has weight or whether the inference works together. I don't know that that's as easily outsourceable as we can think, as we might think that it is.
Because it's not just language, right? It's also it's tone. It's the codes of what you're wearing. It's all of these kind of minute cultural signs that we understand the connotation to, and that would be really hard to deconstruct in real time. But I love that idea, and I'm going to hold on to that idea, honestly, as a future of AI for civil discourse.
I kind of hope it doesn't work out, though, to be honest. I kind of hope it doesn't, because to me that, the act of the thinking and the act of evaluating an argument, the act of doing it is kind of like the philosopher's art, right?
Yeah.
It's I don't want to outsource that to somebody else just to put it into a text box and say, okay, evaluate this position and tell me whether it's sound or not, or evaluate this and tell me whether the conclusion follows. I don't want to outsource that to somebody else. I want to wrestle with the ideas, and I don't want us to collectively just surrender that creativity to something else.
I hear that. Going back to this notion of why do we want the computers to be creative for us?
Yeah.
Let's just not do that. Yeah.
And I think I think people might have a misunderstanding of what AI currently is. Because currently AI is, one way to sort of characterize it, it's just a bunch of nested if-else statements. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but AI does not think. It doesn't evaluate arguments in the way that a human being is doing that. It's taking in data, massive amounts of data, and it's trying to find relationships. It's trying to find patterns. It's trying to organize that data into something that is meaningful for that machine, right? So I think there are some things we can definitely do, like, is this politician making a factual argument? Like, are they lying, basically? I think that's reasonably easy to do. But then, are they making a good argument?
No.
That
we
would
don't
be
need a machine for that.
Right. That would be much more difficult to do with an AI, right? So there are limits.
I want to piggyback on that comment, because when we were doing this again 20 years ago, so all my stuff's vastly out of date. But it's all, I mean, a lot of the current advancements are based on kind of neural network sort of processing. And in these neural networks, you often have hidden layers. You have parts of the network where you have no idea really what's going on, just that it works. You know, it comes up with a solution, and the solution is the correct one, and you train it and so forth, and it becomes, and over the iterations of your training, it's better and better at approximating with the real task it's supposed to do. But when it comes down to it, it's kind of like, they're called neural networks for a reason. They were inspired by how the brain works and neurons in your brain and so forth. And no, of course, it's not a model of the human brain, but it has that kind of, you know, connection strength and so forth that are analogous to what we see in neurons. And it's the same thing when you go and you look at the human brain, you say, what's this neuron doing? And most of the time you have no idea what that neuron is doing. Well, with these neural networks, you go and you look at various layers or various nodes in these networks. It's like, what is this one doing? How does it come up with the right answer? And it's like, we don't know, right? So I think in the short term, at least, this is working against us. Or, you know, these ideas that we can, you know, that it can, as we were saying, you know, find objective truth or so forth. Because a lot of times we still don't know how exactly it's coming to its answer. You know, it's coming to the right answer, and we can verify it with other sources and so forth. But how it's making those judgments sometimes is still not very transparent to us in a lot of these circumstances.
Between artificial intelligence and natural intelligence, do we have to concern ourselves now about a basic softening up of education that has occurred? If what I hear is true, there are now school districts in which there is not a single student reading at a level of proficiency, not a single student who is doing mathematics at a level of proficiency. And we have a school system that has been shut down for 2 or more years, and students are suffering psychologically as well as academically. And this is the force that is coming of age to face AI. And do we have to combat that softening up? Do we have to strengthen natural intelligence in order to survive in a world with AI?
Yes.
I think we've had tools like, for instance, when calculators became easily accessible, people were concerned that, you know, people with children and adults would learn how to lose the ability to do mathematical computations and so forth. But I think over time that has just shifted, and we see calculators as a way to take on the busy work of the equation. Now, to your larger question, if we're going to, you know, the question of like, are we going to become competition with AI? That depends, I think, on where AI goes. You know, I mean, if we have there to generate a kind of general intelligence AI, then there's potentially no limits to that. You know, there's the concept in science fiction, I know you know it, of the singularity. And the singularity in this case is not talking about a black hole. It's talking about a point of no return where essentially the AIs become more intelligent than people. And at that point, we're kind of left behind because the AIs are doing all the decision making, and they're creating themselves and upgrading themselves, and we don't really have much to do with the process anymore. And so that's been kind of a science fiction trope for quite some time, for decades. Whether or not we will see this singularity, whether or not it's actually a thing that could happen, the potential of it obviously is if this did happen, then it doesn't really matter what we do. The AI is going to be more intelligent than us. But I do agree that, you know, sometimes these tools can be overused, and then they can have deleterious sorts of effects on our ability to think independently and so forth. I think even things like this allow us to too easily look up stuff and so forth. And looking up things is not bad, but if it comes at the at the expense of reading and understanding and acquiring real knowledge, not just knowledge that you can temporarily look up, then that could be a negative thing rather than a positive thing. So it depends. A lot of this is going to depend on where AI goes. I think in the general sense would be my answer.
If the progress of artificial intelligence towards natural human intelligence, surpassing natural human intelligence, goes forward something like Zeno's paradox. It gets half the way there again, half the way there again, but never actually arrives at that point. Then there will always be that native speaker's phenomenal ability, whether the person is of ordinary intelligence or not, to pick up, hey, you're not from around here. And that is where the human intelligence trumps artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
I'll shut up. I mean, you're the linguistics guy.
I'm not sure how I follow that up, Bill. Essentially, yes, one of the things that your earlier question, your first question, sort of prompted me to think is that I like to sing in the shower and in the car, and I'm never going to get a record deal. That's never going to happen. But the process, for me, is far more important than the result. The process that I go through of torturing my poor vocal cords and singing along with whatever song it is that I want to do. And I think of that when I think of learning and intelligence. It may be that we build AI to a point where it surpasses individual intelligence, where it may take, say, a collective of humans to approach that. But it's still really important, even for the students who have been, quote unquote, left behind for the past couple of years during lockdown and everything that was associated with the pandemic. I still think it's really important that everyone has a chance to go through the process of learning. And it's just like we were talking a little bit earlier, I didn't get a chance to sort of chime in, the process of something like composition. So I know that you taught composition, I teach composition. The act of composing an essay, going through those steps, taking them through that process, allowing them to develop, allowing students and myself to develop thoughts on paper, whether it be by handwriting, which some people say is even better than keying, but allowing them to go through that process, to me, is what's important. I see people go take art classes or go take dance classes, and they're never going to be an artist or a dancer, but they are going to learn the process of painting or of dancing. And as much as artificial intelligence may present us with a beautiful product, it's never going to be something that, in a very human way, learns those processes. And to me, the process of educating students, the process of learning is significantly more sort of rewarding, I think, than beautiful products. And so ultimately, I think that has to kind of be something that we as a university, as educators, as a society, as a collective, concentrate on. The fact that perhaps technology is going to do all of these things. And it's going to be part of us as well. But it's going to do all of these things. But it is really important to sort of assert our humanness by learning and enjoying a variety of processes. And to me, that's what education focuses on.
Thank you, James. It's phenomenal. I'm sorry, but I want to be mindful of time because we're already over our time limit, right? However, before we go, I really would like to just end with the idea that we started this whole series. So the first, the opening event was a creative production, and the theme of it was Dare to be Human. So technology is great, we create technology, but I think we should appreciate our humanity and actually hold on to that. And because we're humans, I think we're also capable of gratitude. And I would like to thank all of you for participating. And I would like to thank our College of Letters and Science for supporting this series, and UPDC, which is University Personnel Development Committee, right? Professional Development Committee that actually funded all these series. So thank you, and thank you for coming. Thank you for being a great audience. Thank you. If you have questions and you want to stay longer, we can still be here, but